Okay, so that's 2 o'clock, so I think we'll just make a start now. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first in our series of webinars over the next 3 months to support you and your teams during this winter period. Thank you for making the time to be able to join us today. This is a collaboration across a range of teams in HIS, and over the coming months you will hear from national leads and local board teams sharing their work and learning to support the delivery of safe care during these incredibly challenging times. We have had significant interest in these sessions from every discipline right across Scotland, so it would be great to know who has joined us today. So if you want to introduce yourself by putting your name, what your role is and where you work in the chat, that would be really helpful. For those that don't know me on the call, my name's Jo Matthews. I work in Healthcare Improvement Scotland and I'm the head of the Improvement Support and Safety, which includes the head of the Scottish Patient Safety Programme. Move to the next slide, please. I'm sure everybody knows by now those Teams etiquette, but just a quick reminder. So it's cameras and mics off during this session, please. Please use the chat box to raise any questions or any reflections or comments that you have throughout the course of this afternoon session. And following our speakers, there will be an opportunity for you to ask them questions, either by placing it in the chat box or popping your hand up, and we'll bring you into the conversation. This really is, we want this to be an interactive session, so please do be engaged. The session is going to be recorded, so people will be able to access it later if not able to attend today, and that link will be made available to all who have registered. And if you've got any technical difficulties, the email on this slide here is who you should contact, and they'll be able to give you some support. We'll move to the next slide, please. So, safe to start. A question that many of us on this call ask or try to answer on a daily basis. But what rests behind this simple question with an often very complex answer? Over the next 2 webinars, you're going to hear about the structures, tools, approaches and experiences that can support answering this multifactorial aspects of this question. And the question is mainly asked within those hospital huddles, generally first thing in the morning, that question is posed. But the huddle itself, not a new concept and for systems now across Scotland. And to be honest, they take many forms, both in person, virtual, that hybrid form, and actually have a range of different huddles throughout the course of the day. They've been adapted and tested from both industry and healthcare settings right across the world. And the huddle itself provides a mechanism and a forum to bring people together to look back and learn from the previous day, support clear communication and bring a shared understanding, focus and coordination of those priorities for the day ahead. They enable that sense of team, and all of that supports and improves that situational awareness of safety concerns. We'll go to the next slide, please. And in essence, that's about creating the conditions in which that care can be delivered safely. And this is called out within the Essentials of Safe Care, which forms a core part of the Scottish Patient Safety Programme. Next slide, please. And for those that have not heard of the Essentials, there's a link going to go into the chat box now, and you can find out all the information there. But the Essentials describe what are the absolute musts for the safe delivery of care in any health or care setting. And they've been designed and produced by teams across Scotland and now form the foundation in which all of the safety improvement work now rests. Next slide, please. And when we think about all those factors that rest behind being able to answer that question, safe to start, each of the primary drivers within the Essentials directly aligns to it. There's leadership and cultures to promote that real culture of safety. So there's leadership behaviours and attitudes, the communication within and between teams, having those reliable and safe clinical and care processes, all with that relentless focus on delivering person-centred care. And ultimately bringing all of that together to be able to deliver care that is safe for every person within every system, every time. So on that note, I'm going to now introduce Claire Maven. Claire is the acute portfolio lead for the iHub within Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And Claire also leads the SPSP acute element of the programme. And over the course of the last year, we've been doing some work in relation to hospital huddles. And Claire is going to share with you some of the learning from that and some tips around thinking about huddles themselves. So over to Claire.
Thanks, Jo, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today around the work that we carried out to have a look at hospital huddles towards the tail end of last year, and are beginning to have another look at what huddling means for boards and for teams currently. Yeah, I'll get the next slide, thanks. So just a bit of a recap on what Jo was talking about earlier around the essentials of safe care. So we know that these are the building blocks for all of the programmes of work within the Scottish Patient Safety Programme. And when we began to look at hospital huddles, and in particular morning hospital huddles, unsurprisingly, the key elements of these huddles focused around that person-centredness, that safe communication, the leadership, and the safe, consistent clinical and care processes across healthcare settings. And whilst all of these are elements of the huddle, our particular focus as I go through this work will be around the enhancement of safe communication and that situational awareness. Next slide, please. So what does safe communication look like for teams? Well, huddles are one mechanism to provide safe communication or to support safe communication within and between teams. And we know, as Jo alluded to, that the coronavirus pandemic and the continuing system pressures have brought a renewed focus on a range of existing safety programmes, but they've also uncovered some new ones. It's highlighted the challenge of sustaining quality of care during this turbulent time, and also how we embed real-time improvements and look for innovation. And there's a clear need for us to build on what we've learnt from the past, to nurture improvement work in the moment, and to always look for developing what comes next. And when we think about safe communication, and we call this out in the essentials, we focus on the appropriate use of language and format, a standardisation of common tools in communication, and how we manage communication in critical situations. Next slide, please. So in the autumn to winter of 2021, we worked with our colleagues in Scottish Government and Scheduled Care team to understand huddles across Scotland in order to share learning and share practice between boards. And this work had a particular focus on the morning hospital huddle, and as you can see from the slide, a real focus on understanding what was happening in the system. Next slide. The aim of the work was to understand the variation in huddles across NHS Scotland, but also to identify core elements to support teams to improve patient safety, flow and communication as part of the morning huddle. Next slide. So huddles in Scotland occur within teams, they occur within units and specialties, disciplines, and also across organisational boundaries. But as I indicated, this particular piece of work focused on the morning huddle. And we know that they provide an opportunity to develop a situational awareness by providing that opportunity just to lift your head up in the day, to share the current position, to share the challenges and successes, but also to hear from others and develop that situational awareness. So it's the eye on the past, what the present situation is, and what's still to come. And in Scotland, they've largely become digital since the onset of the pandemic, although we're beginning to see some boards move back to in-person huddles. And a good huddle can tell you what's happening on the site, what the current site position is, and what the priorities are, and the anticipation of problems later on that day or indeed the next day. We know that huddles are a feature of highly reliable organisations, and some of those components, such as the sensitivity to operations and that deference to expertise, are part of the huddles. Next slide, please. So what did we do? So we reached out to all of the boards in Scotland, and we were privileged to attend hospital huddles from 14 different sites. We asked teams to share their huddles, and we had 10 huddle templates shared with us. We attended a couple of integrated huddles, and we spoke to in excess of 30 staff to understand the purpose of the huddle for them, what they got out of it, and what they contributed to the huddle. And what we found was in Scotland in general, huddles were brief, they were routine, and they were structured. But there was also wide variation in the focus and the approach to the huddle. Next slide, please. So when I was considering the key features of highly reliable organisations, we generally heard the following things: that the huddle did have a big focus on performance and flow, and that will not surprise you. And some staff did comment that sometimes came at the expense of conversations around safety, although we did not see that everywhere. Are we safe to start? And this is the focus of the Geraldine's talk that's coming up next, so I won't dwell on it. But whilst there was a large focus on staffing in the huddle, and sometimes quite a lot of time was taken up with staffing, common language we found was crucial. Raw staffing numbers were sometimes made it difficult to understand site positions and develop that situational awareness. So having a set way of being able to report staffing was crucial. Sensitivity to operations was demonstrated, and we've seen quite a large amount of innovation in sites, including the use of electronic observations that's fed into the huddle to identify sickest patients and allow priority to be given for urgent review from patients overnight. And it also helped teams to make decisions around where to direct resource. Taking problem solving out of the huddle helps with improving psychological safety and also conversations around staffing. Next slide, please. So that commitment to resilience, we of course seen the switching to digital huddles for the pandemic and staff flexing to make this work. And whilst this had a positive effect on attendance, digital huddles sometimes had some unintended consequences. That things called out were things around that corridor conversation, the unscheduled conversation, that kind of just catch you for a second conversation. And particularly this was called out in new leaders and those trying to find their way in new roles. Deference to expertise and the valuing of clinical judgment was clearly called out. We particularly heard from senior charge nurses and clinical nurse managers about the importance of clinical voice in the huddle and valuing their judgment about making decisions, particularly in relation to staffing and acuity and activity within their clinical areas. Next slide, please. So from the data, from the observations and also from the conversations, we constructed a practical set of elements for hospital huddles which incorporate the huddle cycle, that being what helps in the pre-huddle context around pre-population of templates and visuals, discussion focus in the in-huddle around safety and flow, that exception reporting, which is very important to keep it concise and relevant, that situational awareness, the look forward part of the huddle, and what is the plan going out of the huddle. We also heard around the problem solving element, and whilst we appreciate there is some problem solving to happen in the huddle, in some huddles they were taking quite a bit of time because problem solving was taking up that time. So the role in problems that can be taken out of the huddle to solve, and the huddle report, who receives the report of what happened in the huddle out with the attendees at the huddle, and how does it interface with the whole system, so not just that site but multiple sites in hospitals and partnerships. Next slide, please. So huddles are even better if. So we know that huddles are better if the membership is right. Who are the strategic blockers in your organisation that should be at the huddle? Are medics at your huddle, and what is the role of the medics at your huddle? What other disciplines would you need to invite to your huddle? Would infection control help, for example, particularly during the COVID period? Does your huddle feel safe? We know that visual templates add to the huddle, and to help by visualising the position of the site as a whole, you get a glance, and it does seem to improve situational awareness. Think about how problem solving happens in the huddle and what bit of that problem solving can happen post huddle. Who are those actions owned by, and what is the follow-up process? And we're not just talking about short-term problems, but how do they feed into the wider strategic improvement? What are the recurring issues coming out of your huddle? Next slide, please. So we know that it's a difficult time, and we know that the coronavirus pandemic and the continuing system pressures are there every single day for clinical teams. But huddles are an established key mechanism to support safe communication. And if we go back to the essentials of safe care, having that appropriate language and format, thinking about how we can visually display that, having a standardised tool for your huddle that enhances the communication, but of course should be site-specific for your needs, and giving, I suppose, time to safety and communicating critical situations to allow that psychological safety within sites will also enhance your huddle. Next slide, please. So all of this work is written up as a case study, and you can use the QR code on the screen to access that, and I'm sure the slides will be shared after the today. And there's further information around hospital huddles that we gathered around an evidence review for this work. Someone's kindly shared it in the chat box, thank you very much, and some references. And I think once Geraldine's spoken, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And I think in essence here, what we're describing are what we're able to understand as those core elements that support an effective huddle. And there's nothing new here. This is all practices that we observed right across the system. But it's actually about pulling out what those core themes are and helping people to go back and just sense check. Where are we against those core themes? What are we doing consistently? Where have we actually got some variability? And what can we learn from others? And we continue to evolve and develop this work, and are currently doing some work which will inform the next iteration of this. So definitely would recommend having a look on the website and going into a bit more further detail within the case study. So thank you very much, Claire. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I'd like now to welcome Geraldine Marsh. Geraldine is the Associate Nurse Director at the Western General Hospital in Edinburgh and took up this post right at the end of January 2020, just as the first patient with query COVID was admitted to the infectious diseases unit at the hospital. Nothing like timing, Geraldine. Geraldine's a Scottish Quality and Safety Fellow from Cohort 7, absolutely passionate about quality, safety and patient-centred care. And as the lead nurse in Medicine for the Elderly in the Southern General previously in Glasgow, she implemented the What Matters to Me tool and also supported Healthcare Improvement Scotland with thinking about the different aspects of care in relation to patients with cognitive impairment within acute settings. So I'm now going to hand over to Geraldine, who's going to share with you thinking around that safe to start and prioritisation of care. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. So if we can move on to the first slide, please. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about how we approach safety and staffing at the Western General in Edinburgh, and how we use a whole site approach to ensuring safety across the system. So if we just go on to our next slide. So as Jo said, I came to the Western just at the start of COVID. There's absolutely no truth to the rumour that I brought COVID to the Western as we did admit the first patient with query COVID. But we were looking at the challenges that COVID brought around staffing, but also at the back of our minds was the safe staffing legislation. So we set out, using a quality improvement approach, we set out what our aim was within Lothian around nursing staffing and our approach to nursing workforce. And it was really to ensure that all our sites had the required nursing staff to deliver high quality, safe, person-centred care. And we know that shortage of nursing compromises care both directly and indirectly. And particularly during COVID, we know that recurrent staffing shortages led to an increase in staff stress and with a real focus on well-being, that obviously led to higher sickness and absence and a greater reliance on supplementary staffing. We looked at our establishment and we knew that we had an increasing establishment gap, and we also knew that looking at our age profile of nurses, nursing, that we had an ageing workforce, and we really wanted to try and get ahead of the game because we anticipated that all of these drivers had the potential to increase post-COVID, and actually that has come to fruition. So if I just go to the next slide. So I started to look in February really at all of my wards on the site. So you'll see this is just a spreadsheet of all of my wards, and what this shows you is the wards, their specialties, what their funded, registered and non-registered workforce was, and I triangulated that with the nurse to bed ratio and the skill mix. And what's not on this spreadsheet was I actually triangulated this with our care assurance standards. And I don't need to tell anybody on this call that our red flag areas, there was a direct correlation between wards that were not demonstrating good care using our care assurance framework. And there was a direct correlation to those wards that, as you can see on this spreadsheet, had either a lower nurse to bed ratio or a lower skill mix. So I started to look at this to see what the opportunities were on site to try and address some of our red flag areas, and try and see if we could take a whole hospital approach. So one of the first things that struck me was when I looked at the areas that were gold, if you like, and the areas that were achieving a higher nurse to bed ratio and a higher skill mix, those were all my wards that were small wards, what we would define as small wards, of under 16 patients. So there was an opportunity on the site to look at trying to amalgamate this, because we knew that looking at our looking at our wards and our red flag areas, looking at our establishment gap and looking at our age profile, we knew that at that point we had a potential of 138 whole-time equivalent registered nurse vacancies, and that has only just got worse. So if you move on to the next slide. So we did a piece of work on site looking at those small wards and whether we had an opportunity as a site to take a site-wide approach to those small wards. And we actually amalgamated 5 of those small wards. And what we were able then to do, we were then able to reinvest some of that. Now this is pre-investment to realign some of that skill mix, and this is still a work in progress at the moment. So you'll see that we have managed to realign some of the funded nurse to bed ratios and some of the skill mix. And we have taken the money that we have saved through the amalgamation of these 5 wards, and we have already started to change the skill mix in our medicine for the elderly wards, and we have also increased the funded establishment in some of our other wards. So that was us taking a long-term view of how we were going to approach staffing across the site as a whole site. We've also, and this table also shows you what we have got as a target. So what we have got currently as funded, what we have got in post, and then what our target nurse to bed ratio and skill mix is for every ward on the site. So if we go to our next slide, please. So that was me taking a medium to long term approach to staffing. But actually, what does staffing feel like in the Western right now? So what do our huddles look like? So we have, throughout the pandemic, maintained a hybrid model to our huddle. So we still maintained an in-person huddle, but that in-person huddle was also broadcast across the site through using a Cisco bridging link. So we had a hybrid model, but at our huddle every day we are facing daily staffing challenges, particularly in that overnight period when we've got less senior staff around, and we know that that's when we've got some quite high acuity. And we know that this is having a detrimental impact on the health and well-being of our staff, as well as the safety of the care that's delivered. Staff are telling us that they are struggling on a day-to-day basis to provide safe and effective care. They're feeling professionally compromised. What we hear on a daily basis from nurses is it's my registration that's on the line. And we know that the challenges around workforce have never been greater. So if we move to the next slide. So what are we trying to do as a site to mitigate that risk on a daily basis? So we take a whole site approach to safety. So previously, every clinical directorate would come to the huddle having sorted out their own problems, and the directorates tended to work very much in silos and sorting themselves out. So we've allocated a clinical nurse manager who takes responsibility as the daily staffing lead. So they will look at staffing across the system. They will move staff around the system. They will take a whole site approach. Doesn't always work like that, and sometimes it needs myself or my deputy to come in and be a bit of a referee when clinical nurse managers can't necessarily agree in moving staff around. We changed our huddle template to give clear transparency about staffing that was on. Previously, our huddle template, the wards reported how many staff they were short. And we actually changed our huddle template to actually give a very clear and consistent message about how many staff were actually on duty and whether those staff were senior charge nurses, were registered nurses, healthcare support workers, or whether they were students. And the staffing lead takes a triangulated approach. So we are looking not just at the numbers of staff to patient ratios, but also about the acuity and the dependency, and taking a little bit of situational awareness and having a triangulated approach to safety. And we introduced our safety start guidance. So if we just move to the next slide, please. So this is actually an actual snapshot of one of last week's 2 PM huddles. And you'll see there we've got up on it clearly which manager is taking responsibility for flow, for site lead, and who the clinical nurse manager is that takes responsibility for staffing. And we have changed our template, and you'll see that under that Safe to Start guidance, you'll see numbers there. And those numbers have actually correlate to registered staff to patient ratios. So when they pre-populate the huddle and they put in the actual number of patients or the actual number of empty beds they have on site and how many registered nurses and healthcare support workers they have, the spreadsheet actually calculates out for them what that correlates to in registered staff to patient ratios. And you can see then it gives us a red, amber, green, and that correlates directly with our Safe to Start guidance that we have issued. But we've also got this situational awareness on it, so how many patients we have that are on CPAP, anything else, short-term detention orders. You'll see there one where it talks, although the senior charge nurse is on duty, she's actually on taking the bleep for that directorate. So that allows us as a site to look at not just how many staff we are short, because you will see that that is there, the number of staff that we are short, but it actually gives us a little bit of a situational awareness, and we're able to take a whole site approach and be able to make decisions about how we can safely move staff across the system. If we move on to the next slide. This correlates then with our Safe to Start guidance that we have issued as part of our guidance. So that gives us for each of for the acute hospitals in NHS Lothian, the levels that you saw in that spreadsheet. And it also gives us what actions have to be taken. So there's very clear actions when wards are in red, when wards are in amber and red, and what the actions that have to be taken. And there are times when the site lead will not be able to mitigate for the wards that are level 3. And there needs to be a whole system approach, and that's where we would bring in our pan-Lothian teleconferences, and I would then be speaking to my nurse directors across the site to see if there's any mutual aid can be given. So if we click onto the next slide. So what else are we doing on site to address the shortfalls? Because clearly, you know, that's what we've got, and we only have the staff that we've got on site. But clearly there are times, and I'm just seeing an email coming into my inbox there from one of our sister hospitals flagging some issues that they've got for night duty and looking for mutual aid. So what else are we doing? Because clearly we don't have, like you all will have, we are not able to provide that supplementary staff. And so I've already talked about the action we took to amalgamate the small wards and the skill mix changes that we did. As well as having a clinical nurse manager taking a site lead, our clinical nurse managers now work weekends and lates to support the site for staffing, not for flow, purely for staffing. And that is over and above, and I know some boards in Scotland have their clinical nurse managers doing senior manager on call. Our clinical nurse managers don't do on call, but they are present at the weekends and in the evenings to support staff or to support the site with staffing. We increased our domestic complement on the site to support the nurses to take some of those jobs that traditionally in Lothian were carried out by nurses. For instance, emptying clinical waste bins, and we increased our domestic colleagues, and that actually freed up 4.2 full-time equivalent nursing staff across the site, and freed that back up to allow those nurses to deliver the care. We introduced ward assistants, which are hybrid roles. So a little bit of clerical and a little bit of housekeeping roles. And we introduced those using new money, so not coming out of nursing, using new money with the Kickstart programme. And we introduced those, and again that was about freeing up nursing time to deliver the care to the patients. And another innovation that we're looking at, or we've looked at on this site, is if we cannot get registered nurses and we can't get healthcare support workers, who else can actually help us deliver the care? So we have been, we tested out over the winter our therapy colleagues when they were working, particularly at the weekends, and they were in and they were doing a 7-day model of care, 7-day model of work. Once they had carried out their therapy, they then report to the clinical nurse manager who is on site, and they are then deployed to help on the wards, to help the staff on the wards. And we then extended that to look at therapy support workers working as part of the clinical, to work as part of the ward team. So they are working in the ward as part of the nursing team, and they are providing, they are part of that nursing complement, but they are taking a therapy caseload. So they are looking at the patients who have got the highest therapy needs, and we're just looking at different people that can come on and assist us to deliver care safely on the wards. So if I click on to the next slide, please. And in the same vein, again, we have introduced Band 3 pharmacy support workers. So you'll see that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to look and see what is the unique contribution to patient care that only nurses can deliver, and we are freeing up the nurses to deliver that care by getting other staff who are better able to provide to deliver that care. So that's just some of the stuff that we have introduced. And having volunteers, even just having volunteers to answer the phones, particularly at the weekend when there's no healthcare support, when there's no clerical staff on, that has also assisted us. And the other thing that we have introduced, and I'll spend some time going through this, is our guiding principles. So I talked earlier on about some, so if we go on to the next slide, I talked earlier on about what we were hearing from the nurses on the ground, that they were feeling professionally compromised. They were telling us that they felt it was their registration that was on the line. So what we introduced was a set of 9 guiding principles to assist the registered staff on the wards, to give them permission to prioritise care, and to say to them, whilst we are in this period where we have got real staffing challenges, we are giving you permission in line with your professional standards to use your professional judgment to deliver the care that you need to deliver, and everything else can be put to the side. And we are giving you the air cover as senior staff. We are giving you the air cover to do that. We were very clear that we would use the Safe to Start guidance as our overarching measure of safety across the site. We were very clear with the staff that one of the things that we gave up, and I'm sure everybody would had done something similar during the pandemic, we as nurses stopped all training. Medics didn't stop their training. Therapy staff didn't stop their training. So what we said was, we recognise that that actually probably was wrong, and we will make training and education of our staff a priority, because that is what they were asking us for, and they were asking us for this document now to give them a bit of air cover. We've still got quite a bit of work to do with it. I'm still hearing a lot of particularly band 5s saying to me, but Geraldine, what is it that I'm allowed not to do? What is it? What's my and trying to teach them a little bit about their using their professional judgment, because I think they've been so used to, they've got away from being able to look at a ward, coming onto the ward and saying, right, I normally work with 4 registered nurses and today I've only got 3. So how am I going to reprioritise that work? How am I going to do that to use my, and they can't use that professional judgment. So we've got a little bit of work with the clinical nurse managers to help them, just teaching them some of that reprioritisation to say, well, if you would normally work in 3 teams or 4 teams and you've only got enough staff to work in 3, this is how you do it. So that the guiding principles document was sent out to every member of staff, along with a letter from the executive nurse director to say this is your air cover. We are allowing you to prioritise care, and we will not allow you to be professionally compromised, and we will help you and support you to deliver the care by taking a whole system approach. So between the Safe to Start and the guiding principles and taking that whole hospital approach to safety, and it is very difficult because there are wards who, as you could see from my original spreadsheet, there are wards who traditionally had a higher nurse to bed ratio and had a higher skill mix. And it's really difficult because they're the ones that are constantly having staff pulled from them. But it's by being honest and transparent and sharing this information with the staff is just to allow them to see that we are taking a whole hospital approach to safety. So that, thank you for listening. I hope I've made it a little bit clearer about the approach that we are taking in the Western. We've not got it right, and I'd be really keen to hear how other people are doing it, because I think we need to be able to learn from each other, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. So I think I'm handing back to, is it yourself, Jo?
It is. Thank you so much, Geraldine. That was really, really helpful. And I think the context that you set there in terms of the challenges your organisation and particularly your site is facing are, I'm sure, would be echoed by many on the call today. Now, the chat box has been incredibly busy, and we had planned to go there first. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline and Leslie, who are just going to highlight the questions within the chat box. If anybody has any questions that you would like to come in with, please don't hesitate to pop your hand up and we'll bring you in. But at the moment, we've got quite a lot in there just now. So I'll hand over to Caroline and Leslie to field those questions.
Thanks, Jo. There was indeed many questions in the chat box, so we'll try and get through as many as we can or come back to anyone after the event in response to their questions. So the first question, I think, was for Claire, and it was, when you did the huddle work, did you look into community nursing huddles?
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, thanks, Elaine. So not specifically, however, because the aim of our work at that time was to look at the morning hospital huddle within acute hospitals. However, we did attend a couple of integrated huddles within boards, and at those huddles what we heard was not only the hospital position regarding beds, staffing, etc. being fed in, but also that community element around district nursing staffing and availability, community beds, discharge planning, care packages. So we did attend a couple of very good integrated huddles where a couple of boards had joined that piece up. So not specifically community nursing, but some of the integrated huddles covering the workforce element and workload of community nurses.
Thank you, Claire. The next question is from Linda McLaughlin. I think it's for you, Geraldine. She said, did you use any of the workload tools available through the healthcare staffing programme during the Lothian report?
So we had previously, so our initial, the very first run, we looked at the previous workload tools. We haven't actually ran the workload tools in Lothian. So my very first run of looking back was I triangulated it with the previous workload tools, but not since we've introduced the Safe to Start guidance, no. But that will be our next iteration, is using the workload tools, but also using our Safe Care Live and trying to get that acuity and dependency and trying to get a bit of consistency.
Thanks, Geraldine. Our next question is from Brenda Wilson. She's commended obviously in terms of that whole system approach, but she's wondering what the feedback from staff is regarding the frequent movement from ward, department and perhaps specialty, and if you had any data on the impact on staff experience and satisfaction retention.
So it is a huge issue, and it is one of the things that's probably the biggest contention around staff being moved. What I have been doing is I hold regular sessions with staff, just explaining everything to them about why we, what we are doing to mitigate staffing, because quite often they're just not aware of it. They just see their own areas. And they know that they're the areas that are always getting moved, or would appear to always get moved, and actually just being open and honest with them and explaining to them that they're usually a bit more understanding. But yes, we have had a lot of there's a lot of anxiety across the site, and it has had an impact on wards and departments that are regularly being moved. And I should have said, and when I present and do my open sessions around staffing with the staff, I do always acknowledge the fact that the guiding principles document came from the Sterling work at GGC, and it was totally remiss of me not to acknowledge that it was their work. So I will openly, and I'm absolutely better say that since I'm going back to work in GGC, but I should have acknowledged GGC colleagues in the Safe to Start and using the guiding principles, because the work came from GGC in the first place.
Wise to get that in there, Geraldine.
Absolutely, yep, especially since I'm going back.
Exactly, yeah. I think Sandra picked you up in the chat.
She did.
Thank you. The next question is from Christine Guthrie, and she wants to know if the CNMs are supporting the wards with nursing duties, or the helicopter view just ensuring the areas are appropriately staffed and safe.
So yeah, absolutely, they are. So the staffing lead will take that helicopter view, but the CNMs for the areas are actually in working in the wards if that's required. I was in working in the wards on Tuesday as well. So it's not just the CNMs, it is just it's really all of us when we have to do that. And again, I think that helps with the staff. So I think the staff can see, actually, we are all we're all in this together. And I think Nancy, I know Nancy Burns is on it, and I think having she witnessed that herself when she was on site, that the clinical nurse managers were clearly on the wards working, supporting the staff and supporting some of the junior staff, because it's them who are feeling really compromised, particularly in that out of hours period. So having that senior person there just to give them a bit of support and help has certainly helped them.
Thanks, Geraldine. And I think that was also evidenced by the patients also knew the clinical nurse manager's names, so they were clearly visible in the area. So well done to your senior leaders. I'm not sure if we missed this question, Liz. Did we ask the question about maternity? This was from Marie. And it was, is safe to start being used in maternity too, do you know? And if so, do babies get taken into account in the nurse to patient ratio? Did we ask that one? Just check. No, that's okay. That was Geraldine, I don't, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's maternity in the Western, but do you know if we're using it, or Claire, if there's any maternity areas using safe to start?
I was going to say we haven't seen in any of the huddles we attended the maternity input. Gynecology, yes, but not maternity. But happy to try to pick that up to get an answer to that for you.
Thanks, Claire.
Maybe
Leslie,
somebody has the answer.
I know there's a hand up in the there, so I'm just having a wee look.
Alana wants to come in.
Hiya. I don't have the full answer, but I am one of the department managers at NHS Forth Valley, and one of the things that we've introduced that we just started in September was a community midwifery huddle. That obviously that base start, what we had to do is start up these community hubs, which meant that our midwives were no longer on base with us at site, but out in different hubs in the community. So we realised that we had a lack of input. They didn't know what was going on in the unit, and we didn't know what their workload out there. So when we did have staffing shortages, it was good to start a community huddle where we actually utilise the real-time staffing resource as part of what is the acuity, what is staffing risk, and what's the capacity to support. So it's not all to do with kind of safe to start, but we are making a start on, you know, is everybody okay out in community? How is the unit today? Does anybody have capacity to support? And that we can pull staffing in from community into the hospital if that's needed for acuity or for staffing. So it was just a wee input in what we're doing with maternity here.
Thank you, Alana.
The next question I have, we're probably a wee bit out of sync now, Caroline, because I missed that other one. But the next one's from Fiona Mitchell and Grampian, and I suspect this might require maybe a more detailed follow-up offline, but she's keen to understand what tasks the pharmacy support workers undertake.
Yep, absolutely. So currently at the moment in Lothian, the nursing staff prepare the discharge scripts. So the pharmacy support workers are now starting to assist with the preparing of the discharge scripts. They are also so traditionally the Western didn't have a lot of pharmacy support, so things like medicines management and ordering medicines and clearing out medicine cupboards fell to the nursing staff, the registered nursing staff, so they're taking on some of that role to free the nurses up to deliver care.
And I am aware that this is an approach that is being tested and applied in other boards, so it is something that there may be some further work that we can do to really understand those roles and see if that's something that can be shared more widely.
Thanks, Geraldine. I hope that answers Karen McCormick's question as well. So the next question I've got is in relation to the guiding principles from Carol. She's asked, were the guiding principles developed with partnership involvement, for example, the RCN?
So in terms of Lothian, so I'll let Sandra or Margaret answer about the Glasgow one, but certainly in Lothian, our partnership, that with those guiding principles were absolutely endorsed by partnership and were actually endorsed by our executive leadership team. And when I talked about that letter that initially went out from Alex McMahon, it went out with the support of our partnership leads. So absolutely giving the staff that complete air cover. So, but I'm sure Glasgow will have done the same in their development of their guiding principles.
Yeah, to answer Geraldine's question, we did. We actually set up forums with the senior charge nurses and lead nurses and developed it that way, and then ultimately went through partnership for our final ratification, out and out with a letter and some caveats. We also refreshed it and wave 2 of the pandemic, because we felt a number of things had changed, and it also covered, HP practice too. Thanks, Geraldine.
Conscious of time, we probably could do 2 or 3 more questions and then we need to wrap up.
Okay, the next one I have is from Carol Stewart again. She wanted to know, are all NHS Lothian, can't speak, acute beds on one site? They use a whole board approach to acute beds and safety huddles. So keen to understand what you do.
So we have 3 acute sites, and all 3 acute sites, so St John's, the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh and the Western, and all 3 acute sites use this same approach, and that's how we actually get a whole system approach. So when we are all talking in our Pan-Lothian conference calls, we're all talking the same language and we're all taking the same approach to staff, and we needed to do that so that we had complete consistency.
Thanks, Geraldine. I think that's most of the other questions I think that we've covered already. There was just really continued to ask maybe about the impact on the staff that maybe had changes to their staffing complements, and just really if you'd seen any, particularly around that retention piece, just wondering about your staff attrition and retention.
So in terms of the initial piece of work around the amalgamation of the small wards, the changes to the staffing complements, so clearly the wards that had, so the medicine for the elderly wards that got additional band 6s from the amalgamation of the wards, clearly that was a positive thing. I'll be honest and say that some of the staff who worked in what had been traditionally the small wards, some of the staff for various reasons they couldn't manage, they couldn't cope, if you like, working in a big ward. So some of them there was high attrition rates there. It's hard to know, like everybody else, I guess, we've probably got an increased establishment gap and a growing establishment gap. I think it's hard to know whether or not it's solely down to staff constantly getting moved. I think it's probably lots and lots of different varying reasons, but certainly you know, it's about taking a pragmatic and system-wide approach. We can't not move staff because they're going to be unhappy to be moved. We still need to maintain the safety, but I think we do need to recognise that staff don't like being moved, and we do need to have that open and honest conversation with the staff, and that's one of the reasons why I've been I hold regular sessions with the staff just about trying to communicate that message about what it is we are doing about staffing, because some of the staff on the ground, you know, when we first started to do this, one of the staff in one of the wards said, I mean, it's just dead easy, we're always getting moved to that ward. I mean, why don't they just put the staff, why don't they put shifts out to bank? And you're like, oh, right, I wish we'd thought about that, you know. So staff, I think sometimes staff, you assume that staff know what's going on across the system, but actually they don't always. So it is just about being open and honest and communicating with them. But I think I would be naive, to say that no, moving staff across a system. And quite often it's not just across the Western. Quite often we will be moving staff to St John's or the Royal Infirmary and vice versa. And that is a hard sell actually for some staff, and I think I would be naive to say you know, it hasn't had an impact. It absolutely has.
Thank you so much, Geraldine, and to Claire for answering those questions. A huge amount of information there, and I'm sure everybody on the call found that incredibly helpful. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as I said at the start, this is one of 2 webinars in relation to Safe to Start. And our next session is on the 25th of October with Nancy Burns from Healthcare Improvement Scotland and Terry Hunter from NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. If you've not already registered and today's whet your appetite, then the QR code is on the slide here, so please do use that to get your registration in now. Again, that session will be recorded, and with any questions that we've not been able to answer today from the chat box, or if you're like myself, a bit of a reflector, and you go away and you start thinking, oh, I wish I'd asked that, don't hesitate to get in contact. If you go to the next slide, please. There is an email that you can contact with us, and we also want your feedback. So if you click on the link in the chat, we'll be able to give you the feedback. We'll get your feedback, and we really do use that feedback to inform how we design and develop not just the next session, but the series that we have over the coming months. And if we move to the next slide, please. You have here the email for any questions that we've not been able to answer or that you would like us to pick up. So I just want to take this moment to, first of all, thank our speakers for your time, which has been incredibly helpful today. To our delegates for your participation and engagement. That's what makes the difference to all of these sessions. And lastly, to the team, this takes a lot of coordination in the background, and it might have looked like it was all going smoothly, but there's a lot of little legs going on running around behind there. So I just want to say thank you to the team for all their support in doing that. Lovely to see everybody, and look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much.